We gather today on the 200th anniversary of the hanging of Matthew Brady, not to glorify violence, not to promote criminality, but to remember what Brady's life tells us about power, punishment, and the long road to working class solidarity. Matthew Brady was an English convict transported to Van Diemen's Land as part of a system that was not simply about crime and punishment, but about labour. Convictism was an economic system. It supplied cheap workers to build the colony, and it enforced discipline through fear, brutality, and the denial of basic human rights. Convicts had no rights to organise, no right to refuse unsafe work, no right to fair treatment, and no lawful way to push back. If you resisted, you were flogged, chained, reassigned, or worse, and if you ran, you were hunted. If you survived long enough, you were made an example of. Matthew Brady did not step outside the law because he rejected work or community. He stepped outside the law because once you were marked as defiant in the convict system, there was no safe way back in. The system did not offer rehabilitation. It offered obedience or destruction. Brady's bushranging was not organised labour resistance. It was not collective action, and that is precisely the point. Before unions existed, resistance to exploitation was individual, desperate, and easily crushed. It was criminalised, not negotiated. It was punished, not heard. Brady's story shows us what resistance looks like before solidarity exists. When working people are denied lawful ways to defend themselves, resistance does not disappear. It becomes desperate, isolated, and violent. And the state responds the only way it knows how, with overwhelming force. Brady's hanging in 1826 was not just about one man. It was a public warning. It was meant to discipline the entire convict workforce. It said, this is what happens if you defy the system alone. And for decades, that lesson worked. But history doesn't stop there. As transportation ended, former convicts and working settlers became wage labourers. Convict law was replaced by the Masters and Servants Act. The lash was replaced by the sack. The chain gang by the blacklist. The punishment didn't disappear, it just changed shape. And slowly, something new emerged. Workers learned that individual defiance failed, but collective action could endure. Mutual aid societies formed. Strikes followed. Unions were built. Not to overthrow society, but to civilise it. To turn desperation into negotiation and to replace the noose with a bargaining table. And this is where Matthew Brady connects to us as today's organised labourers, not as a model to imitate, but as a warning from the past. We don't commemorate Brady because we want more bushrangers. We commemorate him because unions exist so people like Brady never have to exist again. And unions are what happens when working people decide they will no longer fight alone. Unions are the historical answer to the violence and dispossession that shaped lives like Brady's. Where Brady faced the system by himself, he was destroyed. And unions say, an injury to one is an injury to all. And this matters today because the conditions that produced Brady have not vanished. They've evolved. Much of the crime we see in our society now is not born by moral failure, but of structural abandonment. And it grows where work is insecure, where wages don't meet the cost of living, where unemployment is punished rather than supported, and where dignity falls through the holes in a frayed social safety net. In Brady's time, the law placed property above humanity and punished the poor for failing to survive within impossible conditions. And today, we still live with the echoes of that logic. When the social contract breaks down, when people cannot secure housing, food, stability, or purpose through legitimate means, some will fall outside the law. Not because they reject society, but because society has rejected them. If Brady was a bushranger of the convict era, then today's outlaws are often those driven to crimes against poverty, not power, in a system that fiercely protects wealth while rationing compassion. This is not an excuse for harm, but it is an explanation of the cause. History shows us that clearly when dignity is denied, desperation fills the gap, and when systems value property more highly than people, the law itself loses moral authority. And unions matter here too, because unions don't just raise wages, they repair the social contract, they create stability. They assert that working people deserve security of voice and dignity within the law, not outside of it. They are the difference between a society that produces bushrangers and one that produces citizens. So today, we remember Matthew Brady honestly, not as a saint, not as a symbol of violence, but as a reminder of what the world looked like before solidarity had a name. We remember him alongside the thousands of unnamed convicts whose labour built this island, whose suffering laid the foundations of modern Australia, and whose descendants would later organise, strike and win rights that many of us now take for granted. And we recommit ourselves to learn that history teaches us again and again that justice is never secured alone, that dignity is a collective, and that when working people stand together, they are no longer easy prey to be silenced, hunted, or made examples of. Thank you. And with that now, if you have flowers you would like to bring forward, maybe we can get them to Matthew Brady.